After leaving Mist Valley, Vermilion Bird finally contacted the command center. She immediately reported on the recent battle and White Tiger's death. There was another long silence at the command center. Everyone was deeply saddened by White Tiger's death. The Four Spirits Fleet was the highest-level combat force in the East Sea region. The death of White Tiger was undoubtedly a huge loss. However, they also knew that death was inevitable. Now, neither side could afford to lose this battle. Only by obtaining the Source of God could all their losses be compensated. Otherwise, it would be an unimaginably painful defeat. First, they had to face the huge losses of their own mutant team. In fact, they also had to watch as the other side gained another Epsilon-level fighter. With one side gaining strength and the other losing it, it was impossible to imagine how great the overall losses would be. Sidu Jin stood behind Li Tianyang. At a time like this, the best thing he could do was to not say a word. He also had to try his best to show grief on his face. Otherwise, even the slightest look of relaxation would give people the impression that he was deliberately mocking them. There was no other way. Originally, everyone in the East Sea region thought that the Jiangnan region was only qualified to assist the East Sea region in this operation. After all, their strength was indeed far inferior to that of the East Sea region. But who would have thought that the lone wolf, who was looked down upon by everyone at the beginning, with no military honor or team spirit, would give everyone a resounding slap in the face? His achievements alone exceeded those of the entire East Sea region's team of mutants. In contrast, the East Sea region had not achieved any remarkable results so far. On the contrary, they lost 3 captains in a row, including White Tiger, who had a supernatural ability index of 9,600. Li Tianyang struggled to open his dry lips. In the last few days, his urine had turned dark yellow, and he was clearly feeling very hot. He said in a hoarse voice, "On the battlefield, the situation changes in the blink of an eye, and casualties are inevitable, but as it stands now, the situation is still under control." As he spoke, he turned his head to look at Sidu Jin. "Minister Sidu, can you contact Chaos?" Sidu Jin rubbed his nose and thought to himself, "I've been so quiet, yet you still haven't forgotten me." Chaos took the initiative to cut off the connection with the command center. "He's always been very independent, and I can't command him." Li Tianyang clenched his right hand behind his back and gripped his left arm tightly. His breathing became heavy, and he said word by word, "But now that the mutants on the outskirts are either dead or retreating, he should be heading to Mist Valley." Li Tianyang's greatest hope now was that Zhang Yi would show up quickly and fight that damn Billy the Kid to the death. As long as Zhang Yi could hold Billy the Kid back, even if he died in battle, at least Billy the Kid would be seriously injured. That way, their East Sea region would have a huge chance of obtaining the Source of God with the last and most important seed, Azure Dragon, on Star Island. Sidu Jin was vague, he didn't say anything about what he was going to do. Also, this doesn't mean that we can tell Zhang Yi to do this or that. So we should discuss it slowly and come up with a specific plan. Sidu Jin would not fall for Li Tianyang's trick. Right now, he loved Zhang Yi with all his heart. In his opinion, whether or not they could obtain the Source of God was not even the most important thing. The most important thing was that Zhang Yi had to live. If Zhang Yi lived, the Jiangnan region would have an Epsilon-level strong man in less than a year. He had made up his mind. When he returned, even if Zhu Jing scolded him, he would propose that the Jiangnan region use its resources to train Zhang Yi. This battle made him realize even more clearly the importance of a top-level mutant in large-scale battles after the end of the world. Vermilion Bird was disheartened and decided to withdraw from the Star Island battlefield and no longer participate in the battle for the Source of God. She staggered her way out of Mist Valley and headed in the direction of Black Tortoise. Corrado City. This was an area far away from Mist Valley, which was currently in a period of truce. This was because all of the truly top-tier experts were already near Mist Valley. Zhang Yi, Sky Dragon King, Azure Dragon, and Yashin Canelo. In a spiral valley frozen into moon-white ice sculptures, more than a dozen elegant and beautiful figures stood on the stepped ice, cautiously looking around. This was the Rose Squad of the Jiangnan region. A cute female team member with long hair was crouching on the ground, and in front of her stood a cute moon-white elf. Judging by its height, it could jump up and kick her knees. However, it did not jump up to kick her knees, but instead looked curiously at the girl in front of it, blinking its big eyes. The girl smiled, her cherry lips slightly parted, communicating with the little elf in a frequency that humans couldn't hear. After a while, she turned her head and said to the ice blue-haired, heroic Rose Squad Captain Ling Hu Feishua standing next to her, "Captain, it says that the big guy is nearby." Ling Hu Feishua's beautiful eyebrows suddenly perked up. "Oh, really? We finally found it." Some people came to the island for the source of God. Others came for something else. However, it was rare to have a clear goal and know exactly what one could achieve. From the moment she set foot on the island, Ling Hu Feishua was very clear that the source of God had nothing to do with her. She knew very well the level of the top masters of the two major forces. With the current strength of their team, they were not qualified to compete with those powerful beings. But every cloud has a silver lining. As long as they were patient and observant, there would always be unexpected gains. For example, the Origin Elves. Among the Rose Squad, there was a female member named Gu Yufei. She was not particularly skilled in combat, but at certain times, she could play an extremely important role. Arya. She can communicate with sea spirits. She can naturally communicate with all kinds of creatures. This includes these cute little things. So since arriving on the island, while others hunted mutants in search for the source of God, only the Rose Squad tirelessly searched for Origin Elves. Although these things cannot help people break through, they can provide a better effect than the origin of mutants and enhance the power of mutants. With Gu Yufei's ability, they had already found more than a dozen Origin Elves on the island. Ling Hu Feishua's ability had also increased to 9,400 points. However, the further they went, the slower the rate of improvement became. Therefore, Ling Hu Feishua began to focus on a special existence in the intelligence. It was called a giant Origin Elf, and it looked very similar to Totoro. She believed that it must be a higher-level Origin Elf, perhaps with a function similar to the source of God. If she could obtain it, her strength would definitely increase greatly. Ling Hu Feishua heard the news about Totoro and immediately went over. "Where is it?" Gu Yufei tilted her head and continued to communicate with the little moon-white Origin Elf. After the Origin Elf babbled for a while, Gu Yufei said, "It says that the big guy isn't always with them. Most of the time, it appears at random. It just likes Origin Elves and often appears around them to absorb their energy. When it's satisfied, it leaves." Ling Hu Feishua raised her eyebrows slightly, somewhat surprised, and said, "The big guy absorbs energy from the little guys? Are they not the same species?" In fact, few people really understood the companion creatures of the source of God. That was because they had only appeared after the end of the world. Currently, the only region known to have the source of God was the Xinjiang region. Nowadays, there are many types of Origin Elves that we have encountered. It must be something special. Anyway, let's catch it first. Then we can study what it really is. Ling Hu Feishua waved to Gu Yufei. Gu Yufei looked a little helpless, but she still reached out and grabbed the Origin Elf. Although the little creature was an elf made of high-purity energy, it had no ability to resist, and was eventually stuffed into a metalkin by Gu Yufei. Ling Hu Feishua looked at the huge spiral pit in front of her and said, "Catch all the Origin Elves here. Then use them as bait to attract the big creature. Time is running out, and this island will become increasingly dangerous. Let's finish this job and then call it quits." Ling Hu Feishua also seemed to sense that something was wrong on the island. She knew that once the battle for the source of God began, all previous agreements between the two sides would likely be torn up. Even Epsilon-level mutants would personally take to the battlefield. When that time came, the entire island would turn into a huge battlefield. If they stayed, even being called cannon fodder would be considered too much praise. "Yes." The female team members replied in crisp voices and took out their equipment. Gu Yufei placed her hands in front of her chest, opened her cherry lips slightly, and sang a song that was inaudible to the human ear. In no time, one after another, small elves crawled out of the radiant white spiral. The team members immediately pounced on them and locked them all in metal cans. Then another group of team members took out various tools and set traps in the radiant white spiral, waiting for the giant origin elf to appear. In order to lure Totoro over, the Rose Squad took a more aggressive approach. After determining that there were basically no mutants in the area far away from Mist Valley, they used high-powered signal transmitters to simulate the energy signals of origin elves and transmitted them to the surrounding area. Then, all the team members hid around the white spiral and waited for their prey to take the bait. Less than half a day passed. The investigation team's detection equipment gave a response. The prey is hooked. Linghu Feishua's eyes flashed with excitement, and she immediately pressed her right hand on the long sword at her waist. In the distance, the poisonous mist surged, and a huge thing was rapidly approaching from afar. Just when they thought it was Totoro attracted by the origin elf's signal, a huge and ferocious monster suddenly leaped dozens of meters high from the poisonous mist and slammed into the deep pit where the white spiral was located. Everyone looked up at the huge figure. However, it was not the giant origin elf mentioned in the intelligence report. It was a giant humanoid monster over 3 meters tall, covered in black armor. What is that? Everyone in the Rose Squad froze. They didn't expect something like this to suddenly appear. But in the blink of an eye, the giant humanoid monster had already fallen into the depths of the white spiral like a bullet. Boom! The entire white spiral was shattered, and rocks and soil flew up like a waterfall flowing backwards. The monster stood in the ruins, opening its huge palm, but there was only a signal transmitter. A human trap? The monster let out an angry voice. Obviously, he had also been attracted by the origin elf's amplified signal. But he didn't expect to fall into someone else's trap. At this time, Linghu Feishua had already communicated the information here to the command center. After receiving the message, the command center immediately began analyzing the images from the scene. The conclusion reached by the intelligence personnel left Li Tianyang, Sidu Jin, and the others speechless. Guanghan, you've encountered a member of Hell's Lock, the Berserker Basaka. They were silent because even though they knew very well how powerful the Rose Squad was, if they encountered a member of Hell's Lock, the probability of total annihilation was extremely high. Retreat, retreat immediately. Guanghan, he's not an opponent you can handle. Li Tianyang gave the warning immediately. The Berserker was a special member of Hell's Lock. He had been perfectly enhanced through human experimentation and was a mutant with excellent enhancement attributes. His enhanced body could withstand the main cannon of a warship. His only weakness was that once he entered killing mode, he would lose his mind. Linghu Feishua's pupils contracted. She never imagined that she would encounter a member of Hell's Lock in a place like this. Unsurprisingly, he had been attracted by the method they used to lure Totoro. But now, how were they going to deal with this terrifying guy in front of them? Run away? Linghu Feishua abandoned this idea immediately. Even if she could escape, she still had many subordinates, and they would definitely die here. It was better to take advantage of their geographical advantage and fight him once and for all. Activate the trap. Linghu Feishua directly gave the order to her team members. Received. From all directions, team members pressed the activation device on their arms. The trap set up to capture Totoro was officially activated. Traps were placed in all directions of the white spiral. Blue energy fibers shot out from the metal boxes, forming a huge energy net that crisscrossed and shot toward the angry Basaka. A moment later, Basaka, who was still angry at being tricked, was completely covered by the giant blue net. He looked down at the net covering him, his eyes gradually turning red, and let out an angry roar. Ah! He grabbed the net covering him with both arms, his muscles bulging like balloons. Then he began to exert force, using his brute strength to fight against the high-tech object. The blue energy net was woven from high-purity energy, containing more than 100,000 volts of high-voltage electricity, which could easily cut a building in half. But Basaka used his bare hands to pull and twist the net, tearing open a hole in it. How is this possible? A team member's eyes widened in disbelief. Is he a monster? Ling Hufeishue was the first to react. They had to take advantage of Basaka being entangled in the energy net and launch an attack immediately. Otherwise, once this monster with only the desire to kill broke free, even with all of them combined, they wouldn't have a 30% chance of winning. All personnel, attack! Ling Hufeishue drew her long sword and swung it diagonally upward. Hearing the captain's voice, the team members finally came to their senses. In an instant, all kinds of weapons were aimed at Basaka deep inside the white spiral. How did I end up here, meeting a bunch of insects like you? Damn it, this is a complete waste of my time. Basaka was in distress, and his roars became even more fierce. He exerted his strength and tore the huge energy net to shreds. At this moment, Ling Hufeishue had already completed the coding for everyone. The enemy is an enhancement mutant who is skilled in close combat, so be careful to keep your distance. She herself leaped high into the air with her sword raised, flying towards Basaka. A Midsummer Night's Dream. She gently opened her cherry lips and blew colorful bubbles from her mouth, which instantly enveloped the entire white spiral. Each colorful bubble was a high-purity bomb created by supernatural powers. Explode! The colorful rainbow bombs exploded like fireworks, completely engulfing Basaka. Soon, Basaka's combat suit was riddled with holes. However, it revealed his dark, muscular, and even somewhat exaggerated physique. His muscles looked like they were made of black gold, glowing faintly in the dim sunlight. Ling Hufeishue had already used the colorful bubbles as cover to fly above him. A pure white full moon slowly appeared behind her, making her look like a fairy under the moonlight, but more like a beautiful and heroic female general. The long sword in Ling Hufeishue's hand elegantly drew an arc in the air. Moon slash! A snow-like light burst forth from the full moon. Then, one after another, bright white moonlight fell from the sky like a crescent moon, like sharp blades, like battle axes, slashing at Basaka in the white spiral. At this moment, Basaka was completely enraged. He took out a blood-stained silver battle axe and roared at the sky. One after another, moon slashes fell in front of him, and he swung his battle axe directly, without any fancy moves, smashing them one by one with brute force. The explosion of energy filled the entire white spiral. The entire Rose Squad's attack converged on him alone. Basaka couldn't defend against all the attacks, and some landed on him endlessly. Before long, his body was covered with shallow wounds. But the blood flowing out only made him more excited. Hey, woman! Those insignificant wounds disappeared in an instant and regenerated at a speed visible to the naked eye. Garrett Brent, Ability Code, Viking War Spirit. He was a top-level enhancement mutant with an ability index of 9,500. He possessed almost all the perfect abilities of an enhancement mutant. For example, super speed regeneration. Basaka held his battle axe and looked at the woman floating in the colorful bubbles in the air. He let out an eerie laugh, bent his legs, and his strong thigh muscles looked like two thick steel bars twisted together. Boom! He stomped his feet hard on the ground and shot up into the sky like a bullet, rushing towards Ling Hufeishue. His speed was so fast that it was jaw-dropping. Ling Hufeishue didn't hesitate, opening her mouth and spitting out colorful bubbles that covered Basaka's vision. She herself quickly flew away. She wasn't stupid enough to get into close combat with an enhancement mutant. Basaka's attack failed, and he was immediately surrounded by all the members of the Rose Squad. Damn bug! He had more and more wounds on his body. Although they weren't fatal, he looked very miserable. However, the more he was injured, the more his skin color slowly changed from black to red. An even more frenzied aura surged from within his body, and his eyes began to be clouded by a fierce killing intent. He looked up at Ling Hufeishue in the air, pulled his right arm back like a spinning disc thrower, and then threw the battle axe in his hand with all his might. Ling Hufeishue was ready to dodge. But when the axe came hurtling toward her, she realized her reaction time was too slow to dodge it. The difference in speed and strength was too great, her eyes couldn't even track the axe's trajectory. In her haste, she could only add 7 layers of protective coating to block it. Puff! 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 The tough supernatural protective coating was punctured like a balloon. Linghu Feishue blocked Basaka's throwing axe with her long sword, and the moment the 7 layers of coating were broken, she finally managed to block it. However, the powerful force transmitted through her arm caused it to go numb, and she felt a sharp pain in her palm as if it had been torn apart. She didn't need to look to know that her sword-wielding hand was covered in blood. This was the terrifying power of enhancement mutants. In close combat, almost no mutant of any type could compete with them. Linghu Feishue was knocked back hundreds of meters before she was able to stop herself, and she was almost knocked out with a single blow. The mechanical flying axe was equipped with an automatic recall device. Basaka raised his hand, and it quickly flew back into his hand. Linghu Feishue's heart shook violently. Did even the lowest-ranked members of Hell's Lock possess such terrifying fighting power? Was this the foundation of the world's strongest military power? Seeing that Linghu Feishue was unable to withstand Basaka's attacks, her deputy captain, Guanyue, couldn't sit still. She drew a huge sword and charged straight at Basaka. "Captain, I'll help you." Seeing Guanyue move, Linghu Feishue felt a sense of urgency. She had already felt Basaka's power, which was definitely not something Guanyue could match. But at this moment, the only one who could help her distract Basaka was Guanyue, an enhancement mutant. "Okay." Linghu Feishue didn't hesitate any longer. She and Guanyue took the initiative and launched an attack on Basaka. Basaka, holding a Viking battle axe, saw the 2 women daring to attack him and smiled crookedly. Roar! He let out a hearty roar and swung his axe at Guanyue, who was the first to attack him. There were no fancy moves, the berserker's fighting style could be summed up in one word: savage. The huge battle axe came crashing down, and because it was so fast, you could hear the air explode. Guanyue held a huge sword in her hand and countered with a backhand strike. Ping! The sound of metal striking metal rang out. The sword was made of Edelman metal and was extremely tough. That's why Basaka couldn't cut it. However, Guanyue's arm was broken by the blow. The sword flew out of her hand, her arm was shattered, and her hands were twisted and deformed. Basaka's strength exceeded her imagination. This was her first encounter with a member of Hell's Lock, and she finally understood why the entire East Sea region was so afraid of them.